We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Weed Talk Now. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Kurt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
And joining us all the way from Alberta in Canada is Dr. Igor Kovalchuk. He is at the University of Lethbridge in Calgary, Alberta. Dr. Kovalchuk, thank you so much for joining us here on a beautiful spring day in the northeast of America.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to, because your reputation is one of the premier plant biologists in genetics. And this is the thing that blows me away about the cannabis world, okay, is you guys are this is the smartest group of people I've ever met. The fact that you can actually dictate the DNA of a plant and explain it is unbelievable to me. So first of all, congratulations on getting to the point where you have this reputation of being one of the top premier biologists and plant biologists in the world. Tell us a little bit about this study and why you decided to study COVID-19 and cannabis.
Right. So we have been studying cannabis since about 5 years. So for the past 12 years or so, I worked on medicinal plants, including medicinal poppy. And as soon as cannabis became, let's say, more open in Canada, I thought it would be a great plant to study because, as you know, it provides us with food, feed, shelter, medicine, clothes, you name it, right? That's probably the only plant that you would want to take with you into space if it was the only one you could, right? So, when COVID started, we were well in the way of analyzing medicinal properties of those varieties. We have created almost 1,500 hybrids and analyzed about 400 of them for the anti-inflammatory effects, for anti-cancer effects, anti-aging, skin diseases, oral health, you name it. And when COVID started, as you understand, it's caused by a virus and it's an infection, right? And if it's infection, cannabis definitely should help, right? And my wife hypothesized that this virus would enter in the same way as SARS virus. At that time, it was late February. There was no such data yet, but we reanalyzed the data that we have from multiple experiments that we do. We use so-called 3D tissues, so engineered human 3D tissues that mimic basically your oral cavity, lung epithelia, intestine epithelia, and we analyzed the expression of these receptors that virus potentially need to enter on the surface of the cells, and we indeed identified several extracts that dramatically decrease the expression of the receptor. So to simplify, imagine if you have a house, a building that has 100 doors, and you have a couple thousand people crowd outdoor, and they have to get in there within a minute. 100 doors likely will allow them, right? So, but if you reduce the number of doors to 20, perhaps, right? The chance of entering the same amount of time is very small, and any infection operates by units of infecting agent in time, right? So if you have number of viral units that enter with our cells, there is a chance for infection to progress. If this virus stalled and cannot enter as efficiently, it will be eliminated by immune system. So our immune system operates well if it has enough, either enough time or enough players. Enough players means antibodies. You've been exposed before. Enough time means the rate of infecting agents versus the rate of our system eliminating them. So, and then when we found that in the months, we received the confirmation from the studies abroad that indeed this virus uses ACE2 receptor for entry. And therefore, what we found with cultivars is basically gives us a very high degree of confidence that those cultivars will slow down or decrease the chance of infection and will slow down the progression of disease for one specific reason, because when the virus enters our cells, it forces all neighboring cells and other so-called target tissues to amplify this receptor. So it's like you got a spy, and spy basically buys off others so that they work in concert, right? So, and basically that's how the virus prepares your target. It may enter through lungs, for example, or oral cavity, and will amplify receptors in your intestine, your kidney, and everywhere else where the target virus is, target tissues is. And in this way, it will force us to succumb to basically disease, get more complications and whatnot. So that's the first study that has been published. It has not been peer-reviewed. It right now is in the process of being peer-reviewed, but the preprint is out there.
Go ahead, Kurt.
Doctor, in your study, you mentioned sativa strains high in CBD. Did you start with like a Charlotte's Web or an AC/DC, or what did you have access to strain-wise to start with?
It's interesting. Most of the names would mean nothing to the reader, right? So because those are not common names, and most of them are created by us, hybrids. We did not, I can confirm that this was not AC/DC or Charlotte's Web that we started with. We started with agnostically completely. So when we profiled 400 varieties for inflammation, we did not pay attention, indica, sativa, high, low CBD, THC. We first checked whether it works, and only then we checked what cannabinoid level is. And we're checking cannabinoids level only for one specific reason, because if the extract works, why should I care what's in it, right? So we know it's safe because through years of consumption, multiple studies, we know that cannabis is safe, right? But I would prefer this variety or strain to be high CBD for one specific reason. If a patient takes it, I want the patients to be comfortable. I don't want the person to take my pill, oil, or whatnot, and get high right away. And some people may be deterred by this, right? So people who may have a disease do not want an additional impairment to have. And that's why we have focused only on those cultivars that would be either 1-to-1 CBD or CBD dominant. We had 2-to-1, 10-to-1, and as high as 20-to-1.
Can I ask? Go ahead, Kurt.
Did any of the other cannabinoids really stand out to you as CBN or CBG? Anything that really made your eyes wide open other than CBD?
Right, it's a great question. So most of the cultivars were, as I said, either 1-to-1 CBD to THC or CBD dominant. There was one cultivar that is THCV dominant that does not work as well, but works as well, right? So it's not as efficient, but pretty good. If we talk about single cannabinoids, in our work, we found that they work too, but not as efficiently as a full flower extract, right? And as you understand, if you take the full flower extract, you have 50, maybe 60 different cannabinoids and 50, 60 terps, flavonoids, you name it. It would be extremely difficult and long to identify what is active ingredient or what is the cocktail. I believe it's a concerted actions of all molecules. Scientifically, very important to understand how and what works, but if we have COVID out there and this helps, I don't think we should waste time, basically 4 or 5 years of research to identify those single molecules that work.
So a reminder, you are watching and or listening to Weed Talk Now, a podcast produced by Pro Cannabis Media. I'm the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, Jimmy Young, along with my co-host Kurt Dalton from Cannabis.net. This podcast and show is available on all those social media outlets out there. So remember to subscribe, share, and like, or don't like if you don't want to. But you know what? We'd prefer you to like this stuff. Anyway, back to the show. So, as I was saying, you mentioned research, Doctor, and, here in the United States, as you know, it's still federally illegal, and there's only one college in the United States, one place that's officially able to research this at the University of Mississippi, and there's been a recent lawsuit here in the United States that was actually won by a research firm exposing the United States for perhaps doing a little something a little shady to keep the researchers at bay. In Canada, because it's federally legal, you actually get grants pretty, I don't want to say easily, because there's never easily getting a grant, but I'm guessing you get some cooperation from your government in Canada for research, yes?
You're absolutely right. So in the past, especially past 2-3 years, there have been a number of grants out there. Yes, the success rate, as for any grants, maybe not high. You know, for some it's 2%, for some it's 10%. But hey, together with Olga, with my wife, we had probably 5 or 6 over the last 3 years. So yes, so if the idea is good, honestly, my gut feeling is there is still some prejudice among the reviewers, right? Because when we reviewed, we're not reviewed and given a grant because it's such a cool plant, but because our scientific hypothesis stands the ground and the experiments proposed are solid and our names are good. And that's the combination that gives you a grant. But even then, sometimes you feel by the comments reviewers do that they're not comfortable with the fact that all these effects are caused by cannabis. But it's changing, so it's getting better and better. You cannot believe in the past 2 weeks how many calls I received from scientists, from doctors. I received calls from doctor from hospitals, from hospital in New York, who is in forefront working with patients. He said that after he has seen an article, he was prescribing CBD and CBG to patients, and all 6 patients, elderly, that he's given are doing extremely well. And I have their emails and their statement basically about that. So.
At one point, Doctor, we had put an article up on cannabis.net kind of saying, could COVID be cannabis legalization's what if moment? Could we find a medical study that showed that it either lessened the strength, it helped with recovery? Do you feel your study is comprehensive enough or a beginning to that moment in the US where we could say, we need to legalize, we need to study immediately, and this is the beginning. This is the study that shows us it can help?
Right, so a word of caution right away. Our work is so-called preclinical, right? So we do not touch patients. We have not touched patients yet. So we are working right now on several clinical trials, right? So including several US teams. I would, if this would happen, it would basically expedite our applications and everything, right? But I agree. So we have a great opportunity for studies like ours to influence the policy making and basically hoping that it will be open and decriminalized and whatnot as soon as possible. Sometimes situations like this influence politics, but in most of the cases, politics influence situations.
That wouldn't have anything to do with the almighty dollar by any chance, would it? I'm just saying.
That's all I wanted to say, yeah.
Now, Kurt and I are both located here in Massachusetts where we originate this program. And I understand that there's a local company, MatTech Life Sciences out of Ashland, where you got your 3D tissue samples. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. So it's a wonderful company. And as you know, a lot of studies that you do, in order for these studies to be very valid and close to a real situation, you have to use patients, right? And you can only do it in clinical trials. It means most of the studies are never done. And they're never done because money is a big deal. People who are willing to do studies is a big deal, right? And applications are extremely difficult, right? So clinical trial applications requires concerted actions of many people. It's hundreds of pages document. Preparation of these clinical trials takes months and months. But if instead using 3D tissues, it's a wonderful idea, right? So basically it's an engineered human skin, and they can alveolar epithelial tissues, and they can do it sex specific. So if you suspect that males or females succumb to infection in greater rate, they can generate the tissues of specific disease. For example, we have studied the psoriasis tissues. So they send you engineered tissues that looks like psoriasis skin. You can directly apply the extract and see whether the morphology changes or you change the expression of molecules back to normal. That's how we identified almost a dozen varieties that strains that help to relieve psoriasis, for example.
This study, obviously it exploded in our industry. We're all looking for that study to show how cannabis can help with COVID. But now it's really gone viral. You're getting picked up, this study, and people rewriting and referencing your study all over media. Did you think when this came out, you would get this type of exposure and this type of virility?
Right, Kurt, it's a great question, and no, I didn't expect that. So I'll be frank, the reason we put it out there, because we badly needed commercial and industrial partners to move us to clinical trial. So, we could go to the hospital, we found people, doctors who are willing to do the study, but obviously it's an organization, people have to be paid, and clinical trial of this magnitude can be anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000. We do not have this money, but we know this is a medicine that will help. And so it was kind of an outcry. It's very unusual and not in the style of me and Olga. We've been around for a while in science and everything. We don't do this, but the situation is such that we felt if we don't do this, it will be buried for a very long time and never help people. But now, because guys like you and other journalists who picked it up, I have several, probably dozens of leads and 2 solid cases where likely we'll get a clinical trial done.
That's exciting. That is exciting. One of our own medical friends, Dr. Ryan Zachlin, has asked me to ask you this question about 2 specific cannabinoids, a CBDA and a THCA. Now, here's the thing about all the cannabinoids, and I've got some working knowledge of it, but I never took organic chemistry in college, let alone high school. Forget high school. Okay, I didn't even go near biochem labs in high school. But how can you identify each specific cannabinoid and the impact that one has on the other? Or is it more about the ratios of the CBD-based ones versus the THC ones?
Jimmy, it's all of the above, right? So first of all, it's not our intention to identify all cannabinoids, right? So because it was not our intention to understand what works. Why? Because I do not believe that we'll identify one. The ratios likely is important. I give you an example. When we identified several varieties that work well for specific rare cancer, we started doing ratios, let's say from 1 to 16 to 16 to 1. So we've done like profiling of 12 different ratios, and we identified a golden spot where we've seen potentiation, right? That means that if you have one cultivar reduces, let's say, the growth of cancer by, I say, 2-folds, another one 2-folds, put them together, they together were 6-folds, for example, right? So this is quite difficult. It takes a long time, and therefore there are some cases that we know what works. So, for example, when we did colon cancer versus breast cancer, right? And then we found cultivars that work and then don't work. And then we did correlations with level of THC, CBD, and whatnot. And for one cancer, and don't quote me that I don't quite remember, but I believe for colon cancer, we found positive and negative correlations clearly established for specific cannabinoids. But for breast cancer, it was completely irrelevant. So we could not look at the cannabinoids profile and tell whether the cultivar would work or not. Same with terps. We identified a couple terps that correlate very well. So their presence would either help or actually negatively influence the capacity of THC, let's say, to kill the cancer. So my point is that cannabis is not generic whatsoever. You cannot just look at the profile of cannabinoids and say, this will help me or this will not help me. In general, I would say high CBD variety should have anti-inflammatory properties, but we are releasing the paper right now, a second one on the cytokine storm. We identified varieties that dramatically reduce key pro-inflammatory molecules. And we have selected from a number of cultivars that work. We have selected 7. And out of these 7, 2 would do harm. 2 would actually intensify your inflammation. 3 did very well and decreased that, and couple had no effect, right? And this is already from pre-selected group, right? So one has to be careful and do the preclinical work like we've done before proposing that specific strain cultivar would work, right? Do not judge just by cannabinoids.
You just walked into my next question, which all the viewers who wish they had access to you will be watching this. Other than high CBD, I will ask you because I know that's what people will ask us. Doctor, I live in California. I have a lot of dispensaries around me. I'm worried about COVID. What should I go by other than just saying a high CBD strain?
Right. Well, just to make it sure, I'm a medical doctor, but I'm not licensed to practice, and I cannot make any medical advice or not. I believe that high CBD, high terp profile strain is better. So if just a high CBD is of concern, then I would pick the variety that has a higher fragrance, right? So because in general, higher terps varieties have a stronger effect.
You mentioned you didn't want to say a high THC because you didn't want patients to get that high effect. But what did THC in your study show with COVID? Anything as far as antiviral properties? If someone didn't mind getting really high, would THC also help? Or are you just saying don't use high THC because of the high effect?
Right. So I have to be careful answering this question because there are some things that have been published, or in that paper that we have released, we do not report separately THC or CBD, right? Okay. And therefore, what I would be saying, how should I say? I would be saying something that people have not seen the data for, right? And yes, there were varieties that were high THC that worked quite well, right? But the reason, again, we did not want to focus on them is that we did not want people that would take a medicine be repelled, let's say, by medicine and not take it again, right? Every doctor that we talk to in Canada or US has the first concern is, will my patient take it, right? So because in order for medicine to work, you have to take it regularly. You cannot skip, right? So, and a lot of patients that haven't seen it or haven't tried, if they try once and it doesn't work, they feel uncomfortable, tingling, or whatever, they will not take it anymore. And that means the medicine will not show its potential. So to cut this and answer your questions, yes, THC works, not all varieties. We haven't used a THC dominant cultivar, but 1-to-1, let's say initial 6-7% of THC or CBD in the flowers work as well as high CBD.
Let me ask you a question can I ask a question about terpenes for a second here, Doctor? And I've talked to a few other cannabis experts, scientists, about terpenes and the role that they play in this plant. Can you describe the relationship between the terpene makeup and other cannabinoids like your CBD, A, N, G, ABC, 1, 2, 3? Sorry.
Right. So if you look at biochemistry, the initial precursor somewhere very on the top of the pathway is the same. So the rule of thumb is, again, don't quote me on that, but if the variety is high in cannabinoids, typically it's high on terps, right? Then specific terp that is produced, that of course depends on the availability of many enzymes, and that's where cannabis gives a wonderful opportunity to have, because it has such a broad number of varieties. Imagine even if you take 5 to 10 major cannabinoids, right? And if you take 5 to 10 major terpenoids, the possibilities of the ratios and presence of one or another are almost endless, right? You may have thousands of different possibilities. So therefore, you may find nearly always you find the variety that works well for your conditions. So typically, cannabis works well for conditions that are involving chronic inflammation, right? That's where cannabis thrives, I believe. And some terps directly influence cannabinoids. Some terps actually can bind to the same receptors, right? So they can bind to CB1 or CB2 receptors or any other G protein coupled receptor and have either identical effect or skewed effect. So it's basically, if you have a lock and you have a perfect key, you open it fairly quickly and the result you enter, right? You may have a terp that can bind and the key would kind of stuck, but then finally work, right? So effect would be slightly different, but similar. Or then you may have a combination when two molecules compete. That's why you say you take CBD and THC, right? CBD is a partial agonist of THC. So the higher CBD in the variety, the more chances that the effect of your THC will be altered, right? It may be altered that you will feel less high. It may be altered that it will be less pain killing. It may be altered it will be more pain killing. And that depends on all other molecules are in there. So that's why cannabis is extremely difficult to figure out in terms of what exactly is an active molecule.
That's right.
I guess I have to ask, Doctor, here in America, I live in a state, not in Massachusetts, but if someone says I can only get legal access to hemp CBD with almost no THC, is that as good and should I use it? Or how does the hemp CBD play into what you think of the THC CBD 1-to-1 ratio?
Kurt, it's a brilliant question. And I love your American hemp over our Canadian hemp for one specific reason. Our hemp industry was sort of I shouldn't say it was more established because you guys started growing hemp in 17th century, something like that. But most of our industrial hemp varieties were a classical industrial hemp. That means tall, stocky, typically low fragrance, low CBD, so pushing 2% maybe in flowers, and therefore very low terps. But you guys registered a number of varieties. I know in Oregon, for example, that are very high CBD and therefore high in terps. So the chances that they would work more efficiently than our industrial hemp are much higher. From the varieties we have published, there was 3 or 4 that are industrial hemp. Right, but those were not industrial hemp, that classical industrial hemp that registered in Canada. We are only now preparing them for registration, and those varieties had higher level of CBD and better fragrance, and they were more efficient. So, in short, if it's the right variety, it doesn't matter whether it's a hemp or marijuana. As soon as it has molecules that work. If it has high CBD, it has to be tested, of course, because likely not all of them will work.
You know, you mentioned testing, and I've got just enough knowledge to be dangerous about the endocannabinoid system. And every human or every mammal has an endocannabinoid system. And every time you try a different strain, even if you try one or Kurt tries one, I try one, it's going to have a different effect because of our internal endocannabinoid system and how it balances. So how in the world can you do all this research and then come back with findings about specific strains when you know that if I take it or Kurt takes it or you take it, it's all going to have a different effect on all of us? You talk about a challenge. This is probably the most challenging plant in the world, yes?
Right. Well, you opened the Pandora box, right? So because, of course, well, even if you look at, at any trait, it's a numbers game, right? So if you imagine you have an extraterrestrial landing and I don't know, let's say in Sweden, and concluded, well, all human are 180, blonde, tall, blah blah blah, right? So, but no, right? So unless you take a representation of everyone, you would not be making an average, right? For any register, if you want to register a drug, right? So and get the DIN number, you have to do a clinical trial in specific population, right? So if I want to drug to be sold in Japan, I better test it on Japanese, right? So the variation in our response, like the way cannabis works, it starts from first how it enters in our organism. So the variability is enormous. Well, it depends how you take it, whether you smoke it, you inhale it, it's sublingual, it's intestinal, so smoking and taking a gel cap, the bioavailability would be different from 70, 80% down to 5, 7%, right? So when you ingest it. So the variation also between two people, maybe one would have 5% bioavailability, another one would have 20% bioavailability. Not only genetic makeup, but so-called epigenetic makeup. It means environment. And environment would be as simple as whether you ate some fatty food or not, right? If you ate a fatty food, you will double or triple your bioavailability. That means you need a 2-3 times lower dose to have the same effect. And in addition, all the genetic variation among human, sex differences, whether you're healthy or not. There are a lot of diseases that have either lower endocannabinoid system operation or higher. So in ideal world, you have to know this, right? So you have to take a buccal swab or blood test and see what's the health of your endocannabinoid system. What receptors do you have expressed, right? So based on this, you can make a prediction on the dosage. Even then, the doctors advise to titrate, right? So every clinical trial almost starts with low, goes high, and then as soon as you start feeling uncomfortable, you return one step back and use the one that is high enough and gives you still a good effect. So combination, and it depends not only how it gets into your system, how it works on your receptors, but how quickly it is out, right? So metabolizing enzymes are very different. You can have 20-fold difference in metabolism. That means if I take 10 mil, and I'm just exaggerating, right? If I take 10 milligrams of THC, right, and I will feel high, let's say within, I don't know, an hour, right? And then in 2 hours, effect is gone because my metabolism's eliminated it, right? But you may take the same dose, you may get either high, either faster or later, and it will last for 12 hours, right? So because your metabolism is so slow that your system cannot basically kick it out of the organism very quickly. So enormous variations.
Doctor, you mentioned, this wasn't about going viral and being famous. You needed funding and you need more funding.
Right.
I think your study is very important to get U.S. Federal legalization of the cannabis plant. If someone is watching this, how can they contact you? How can they get you funding? How can they communicate with you to get this further along?
Absolutely. I'm not sure whether, well, Preprint should have the email there, right? So you can get in contact with me by email or look me up on LinkedIn, right? So under my name, and I typically respond to every person. So if I did respond, that means I was overwhelmed. Probably I'll respond tomorrow or day after, right? So, but yes, I want opinion of everyone, even if it's just a statement that, I have this and use this and it worked. I would glad to hear from you. If you're a doctor, so just want to say hi and say what you do. I'm not in position again to advise doctors what to do, but I would love to hear their stories. If you're out there, a businessman, an influencer, or an investor, whatnot, again, we have all the mechanisms of using your help, right? So to advance this as far as possible.
I hear start low, go slow, and remember that this is truly a plant medicine. and you are self-medicating. So you're actually acting like your own guinea pig when you ingest this stuff and take this stuff. Real quick, we've got COVID-19. I think everybody recognizes it attacks the respiratory system. I'm not a scientist, but I've read all about COVID-19. Is there I want to talk to you about the way to ingest the cannabis plant. A lot of people still, the majority, use it and smoke it. They'll inhale it. They'll ignite it and then inhale it into their lungs. There are others out there that use tinctures. There are some that use gel caps. You even mentioned that as well. Is there a type of titration that is more effective or less effective, or again, does it come down to the individual's metabolism and use?
Right. So again, it depends on different disease, right? So if you strictly talk about COVID, there are a number of so-called gateway tissues, right? So if you're not diagnosed yet, so if you want to prevent yourselves, then use as mouthwash, gurgle, for example, as well as a gel cap or oil, probably be the most advisable, right? So, if the person is healthy, there's no point of inhaling this, right? So a mouthwash and gurgle would prevent, again, this is a hypothesis, has not been done on real humans, so I have to make disclosures that people don't run and start doing this, right? So, but that's what I think is going to happen. If you have a positive symptom, if you have been identified to have a disease and your symptoms are still mild, I still believe that the same combination, mouthwash, gurgle, and oil would be the best, because mouthwash and gurgle continuously expose. We have a great, basically, ring of immune health, let's say, right, to tissues in our throat, and washing and continually exposing them would have a tremendous effect on ability to reduce infection and whatnot. If if the symptoms are associated with already with lungs and whatnot, this is extremely difficult question to answer because it may harm people, right? So unless I identify all the blood parameters, the oxygen, and whatnot, I cannot say whether inhaling would work. I would definitely not smoke it, right? So it's just counterproductive. Inhaler may be good, right? So, but it would depend if the lungs are still reasonably healthy and whatnot. So, unfortunately, there is not a simple answer in here.
No, well, it's a very complicated plant. There's no simple answers, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Kovalchuk, I want to thank you for taking the time. Your study is awesome. We encourage people to continue to support research. And if you can't get it done in the United States, look north of the border, because there are guys like Dr. Igor Kovalchuk that are just waiting for you to write a check so he could do more research on the benefits of the cannabis sativa plant. Dr. Kovalchuk, best to your whole family. I think that you should start recording your family dinners, because I'm guessing that would be very interesting conversation amongst all your researchers and your wife and daughter and the whole nine yards. So again, thank you very much for joining us on We Talk Now.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a good one.
All right, and that'll do it for another edition of We Talk Now. I am your host, Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Kurt Dalton from Cannabis.net.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media, supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.